My name is Dov Lipman. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. If you would have told me growing up in Silver Spring, a regular American boy, that I would end up serving in the Knesset, even living in Israel, serving in the Knesset, I would have told you that's an impossibility. Supported Israel, loved Israel, marched for Israel, raised money for Israel, but moving to Israel wasn't really something that we thought about growing up. But my wife and I came to Israel as part of a trip. The school where I was teaching in Maryland came on a mission to Israel. And this is in November 2003. And something pulled at our hearts and our souls. And we decided we're going to make Aliyah. So this is the beginning of 2004. And I had to make a very difficult phone call when we decided we were making Aliyah. And that phone call was to my grandmother, who sadly passed away a few months ago. But my grandmother was 95 years old when she passed away as a Holocaust survivor. Here she was in the golden years of her life, enjoying her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, actually, thank God, great-great-grandchildren. And we saw her all the time. And now I'm telling her that we're moving thousands of miles away. I was so afraid to tell her this. I finally found the courage. I picked up the phone, I called her, and I said, Bubby, I have some news for you. God willing, this summer, Dina, myself, the children, we're making Aliyah, we're moving to Israel. I was prepared for what I call, somewhat jokingly, the wrath of Bubby. My grandmother has no political correctness. She's going to be really upset that we're moving away. And I shared the news with her, and there was a pause. And she said, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Shehechiyanu V'Kimanu V'Gianu L'Zman Hazeh. A blessing which thanks God for keeping her alive and bringing her to this great day. And I said, Bubby, where did that come from? I wasn't expecting that reaction. She said, it's going to be really hard to have you so far away. I'm not going to see your children growing up. But she said when she was on the boat going to America after the Holocaust, the entire way, she said she was asking herself, why am I going on a boat in this direction to another foreign country to the Jewish people when I could be on a boat going in the other direction where a new Jewish state is being born in our biblical and our ancestral homeland? And she said to know that her grandchildren or great-grandchildren are settling in Israel, she has nothing but thanks to God. That blessing from my grandmother shapes everything about who I am and what I've, thank God, been able to do since I came to Israel, because that perspective of the magnitude of the establishment of the state of Israel, the opportunity to have a Jewish state, is something which I wake up to every single day. And it inspires me and motivates me every single day to try to do my part in making Israel better. We moved to an incredible country, which was 56 years old at the time. We had everything we needed for our children, education. We had transportation services, health services. Amazing what people built in this country through blood, sweat, and tears. But I learned in the hometown where we live in Beit Shemesh that there's one thing we haven't figured out how to get right, and that is there's still too much infighting amongst Jews. There are tensions amongst Jews about what should the nature of the Jewish state be like. And I understand those tensions. You have people who are religious, you have people who are secular, and every one of them wants to see the Jewish state in a different mode. But for me, when I saw Jews fighting with one another and tension, not physically fighting with one another, but real rhetoric against each other and difficulty in terms of trying to find a way to develop policy and how should we get along with each other, I said to myself, we talk all the time about Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, all of our external threats, and they're all real. But from my perspective, the greatest threat to Israel's future is what's happening to us internally. All of our sources tell us that the temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred amongst Jews. And the only way we can have a final redemption and have peace is if we rectify that flaw. So I became a community activist trying to bridge the gaps between the different groups in Israel. I came with a very American, can't we all just get along approach? And that led me to the public sphere, to the media, and eventually to an offer to be on a Knesset list, to actually run for the Knesset. I never had aspirations for this, but once the opportunity presented itself, I grabbed it. And there we were in January 2013, election night. I was number 17 on our party's list. It's very different than in America. In America, anybody who's watching can stand up and say, I want to run for Congress, work really hard, and get on the ballot and win and get a seat in Congress. In Israel, you have to be part of a party, and your party has to get enough seats in proportion of the percentage of the votes to you to get into the Knesset. I was number 17. It wasn't realistic at all. A party called Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid, a party that very much focused on these religion and state issues and secular and religious relationship. And we worked very hard in the campaign, and there we were on election night, and out of nowhere, we won 19 seats, and I found myself elected to the Knesset. I found out that night that I was the first American-born member of Knesset in 30 years. And if I didn't find that out that night, I would have found it out over the course of the next few weeks, as I was bombarded with emails from the hundreds, if not thousands, of English speakers in Israel who now saw me as their congressman in the Knesset, and they needed help with whatever it was. And we certainly turned my office into that. Parenthetically, before the inauguration, I came home one day and there was an official letter waiting for me from the Knesset. And I was all proud of myself. Look at me, I have an official letter from the Knesset. And I was traumatized by what the letter said. The letter said that according to Israeli law, it's forbidden for me to be sworn in as a member of Knesset if I hold citizenship in another country. I come from a very patriotic American family. My father of blessed memory was a federal judge. My father-in-law was a U.S. Army chaplain for over 20 years. My wife grew up on U.S. military bases, including West Point. The American flag flew outside our home all year round. Without question, I woke up every morning saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and now I have to go to the embassy and renounce my citizenship. It wasn't a difficult decision to make to do it, because of course I wanted to serve in the Knesset. But it was difficult to actually go through the process. I was there. They make you stand in the embassy and actually say, I hereby renounce my citizenship. I felt like an ingrate to a country that really gave our family so much. When I moved to Israel, I wasn't running away from America as much as I was running to Israel. And they gave me my passport back with a big hole in it, and actually a certificate which says you are hereby not an American, just to make sure I understood what I just did. But I want to tell you, I was thinking about it a few hours later. There's something really special to know that my ancestors were citizens of a commonwealth of some form in this land. And here I am. I'm just Israeli without any official ties to any other country. We've really come full circle. Serving in the Knesset was the most incredible blessing. Instead of sitting at home complaining about what's happening in my country, I was able to wake up every single day and go to work and try to make real changes. And I found myself working on issues about the integration of the ultra-Orthodox population into Israeli society, working on the religion and state issues. I had the portfolio for what we call in Hebrew Tzar Balei Chayim, which is protecting animals from unnecessary suffering, which was a core Jewish value. The environment was another portfolio, another core Jewish value, and it was really great to be part of that process. And I had to learn Hebrew. That was a big fear of mine. Anyone who's watching, I don't want you to ever see Hebrew as an obstacle to spending time in Israel, studying in Israel, serving in Israel, or even living in Israel. I'm not a genius of any kind. I worked very hard. The Knesset gives every single member a budget to learn a second language. Most use it for English, some use it for Arabic, some for Russian, and I made history. I was the first sitting member of Knesset to use it for Hebrew. And I worked very hard with my tutor and was able to get to the point where I could communicate without a fear of making any kind of a mistake. Aside from all the work that I was doing inside of Israel, my second week in the Knesset, I got a call from the speaker's office, and they said, there are 20 members of the French Parliament in the building, go meet with them. And I said to them, you have the wrong guy. I'm here working on these domestic issues of religion and state. I have no background in foreign policy or diplomacy. They basically said to me, you're one of a few members of Knesset who speaks English. Go meet with them. I went into this room totally unprepared. And I just started talking about all the wonderful things that are happening in Israel. Technology and medical advances. There had just been a natural disaster somewhere, and Israel was the only country with a field hospital on the ground. All the things we're so proud of about Israel. I was no more than 5 minutes into this presentation, and a member of the French Parliament interrupted me mid-sentence. I'll never forget this moment. And he said, excuse me, sir, we don't want to hear about all of this. We are here to tell you to stop building settlements. He said, because of Israel, radical Islam, the Middle East, he said, is in flames, and radical Islam is spreading all around the world and has even reached France. That's a pretty heavy indictment about our little country. And I asked what I thought was a rhetorical question. I said, can one of you please tell me when the PLO was established, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which became Palestinian Authority? When was it established? And none of them knew the answer to the question. The answer was 1964. That's 3 years before there were any settlements. The settlements come in the wake of the Six-Day War in 1967. So if Israel's causing chaos in the world because of settlements, Why was the PLO established in 1964 and starting to terrorize Israel even then? And obviously this conflict is about far more than settlements. And to suggest that Israel is the cause of the Middle East being in flames and Israel is the cause of radical Islam spreading around the world, it's crazy. And a light bulb went off in my mind, and I realized I have to use the platform that was given to me as a member of Knesset who speaks English as a mother tongue to travel around the world and make the case for Israel. And when I make the case for Israel, I found myself on college campuses and parliaments all around the world. I don't say Israel is always in the right. We can make mistakes. And I don't say you don't have the right to criticize Israel. Of course you do. I can criticize your country, you can criticize my country. But there's a line that you cross from legitimate criticism to outright anti-Israel bias. And that I'm going to fight against. Because Israel has a right to exist. The Jews have a right to their state in this land. It is a state that stands for equality and justice. And I'm not going to let anyone say otherwise. We're in a complicated, complex conflict with the Palestinians. And there's no simple solution in sight. And I want everyone to understand that complexity. And everyone to understand that it's not only, if Israel would only do X, then we would have peace. Because that X, which most people are asking for, means the destruction of Israel, and Israel not having any security whatsoever. So that's my message as I travel around the world. I want people to be educated, know the facts, and most importantly, come to Israel yourself and learn it for yourself, and then you can educate other people when you go back to your campuses or your workplace or to your neighborhoods. And that's the best thing that anyone could do for Israel. People often ask me, what do I think about Israel's future? I was a member of Knesset. I certainly saw things that many other people haven't seen. You know, the security situation is not simple. Certainly the internal divisions within Israel, both Jews against Jews and Jews against non-Jews in Israel. There's a lot of things that we're working out. What do I think about Israel's future? I can look at you and tell you, I am nothing short of totally optimistic about Israel's future. This story is the most incredible story in the history of the world, of a people who were exiled from their homeland. And for 2,000 years, wherever they were, often in the worst of circumstances, they said next year in Jerusalem, and they meant it. They really believed it. They opened up the Bible and they saw prophecies talking about our return to this land. And it's happening right in front of our eyes. We don't have to believe it anymore. We see it happening, and we can be part of that. So of course I'm optimistic about where we're heading as a people. There will be ups and downs along the way, and sadly there'll be sacrifices along the way, but this story is heading in the right direction. It's such a blessing for me to be a part of that story. And the moment that captures this for me the most is my grandmother, who I referenced at the very beginning of my words. She found the strength to come to Israel when I was a member of Knesset, and she visited me in my Knesset office 70 years after her liberation from Auschwitz. May 1944, a train pulls into Auschwitz-Birkenau. That night, her parents, siblings, and almost 30 nieces and nephews were exterminated. They were murdered that night in the gas chambers. She was spared because she was on the younger side. She survives that hell, and 70 years later, she's sitting in my Knesset office. And she said, Dov, this doesn't make any sense. Jewish state, Israel? Jewish capital, Jerusalem? A Jewish parliament, the Knesset, my grandson as a member, this doesn't make any sense. And she's right. We are blessed to live in the most incredible of times. I often ask myself, what would my great-great-great-grandparents have given up to breathe the air of Jerusalem for 5 minutes? Give me 5 minutes. And here it is. It's right in front of us. We take it for granted. But we all have to recognize the incredible times in which we live. So of course I'm optimistic about where we're heading. And every single one of us in this incredible time has to stand up and be counted. When we're blessed by God to live in times like this, we can't sit back and just let it be. We all have to be part of what's happening. For those who are blessed, and I always say this very deliberately, I use that language, blessed, it'll be that Israel will be your home one day. It's the most incredible place to raise a Jewish family and to see your Jewish children connect to their Judaism and their homeland. For those who aren't blessed to live in Israel, raise your children to get to Israel one day and then join them when you're retired. But be out there advocating for Israel, supporting Israel, standing up for Israel. Every single person, according to their talents and abilities, can do something. But one thing is for sure, that we can't sit back quietly during these incredible times. And if all of us do that, I don't have a doubt that we'll cross that finish line and Israel will take its rightful place as a light unto the nations as it's destined to be. So I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you and look forward to our incredible conversation.